My name is Olivia Bennett, and I'm about to tell you a story about revenge, love, and the most satisfying moment of my life. But first, let me take you back to the day it all began. It was a rainy Tuesday in Manhattan when I deliberately crashed my beat-up Honda Civic into a brand-new Porsche 911. Yes, you heard that right. Deliberately. I watched the owner step out of his car, tall and handsome in an expensive suit, his face a mixture of shock and anger. He looked at the dent on his pristine sports car, then at me, and I could see him trying to control his temper. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight but concerned. I stepped out of my car, wearing my carefully chosen outfit, worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, and old sneakers with holes. My hair was in a messy ponytail, and I wore no makeup. I looked like someone who could barely afford her next meal, let alone fix a Porsche. "I'm so sorry," I said, letting my voice shake. I don't have insurance. I lost my job last month, and oh God, I can't afford this." I watched his expression change from anger to pity. "Perfect." "It's okay," he said, his voice softening. "Don't worry about it. Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine, but your car, it's so expensive. I'll pay you back, I promise. I'll work extra shifts, Hey, he interrupted, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's just a car. Insurance will cover it. What's your name?" "Olivia," I said, looking up at him with what I hoped were innocent eyes. "I'm Christopher Vanderbilt." And there it was, the name I'd been waiting to hear. Christopher Vanderbilt, heir to the Vanderbilt real estate empire, net worth $2.3 billion. And according to my research, he was single, arrogant, and had a reputation for dating models and actresses who only cared about his money. What Christopher didn't know was that my beat-up Honda Civic was actually a collector's item I'd bought specifically for this purpose. What he didn't know was that I, Olivia Bennett, was the anonymous founder and CEO of Bennett Technologies, a company that had just been valued at $5 billion. And what he definitely didn't know was that I was about to teach him and his entire family the most expensive lesson of their lives. You're probably wondering why a billionaire would go through such elaborate lengths to meet a man. Well, let me explain. 6 months ago, I attended a charity gala under my real identity. I was there to donate $10 million to children's education. At that gala, I overheard a conversation that made my blood boil. Christopher Vanderbilt was standing with his mother, Margaret, and his younger sister, Caroline. They were laughing about a young woman who just left their table in tears. "Another gold digger," Margaret said with a cruel laugh. "Did you see her face when you told her Christopher would never marry someone from her economic background?" "Mother, you were brutal," Caroline giggled, "but necessary. These poor girls need to know their place." "Absolutely," Margaret continued. "Our family has standards. Christopher will marry someone from our world, someone with class, breeding, and their own fortune. These desperate women who think they can trap wealthy men are pathetic." Christopher said nothing. He just smiled and sipped his champagne, completely complicit in his family's cruelty. I watched the young woman who'd left their table crying in the bathroom. Her name was Sophie, and I later learned she'd been genuinely in love with Christopher's cousin. The family had humiliated her so badly that she'd left New York entirely. That night, I made a decision. I would show the Vanderbilt family exactly what it felt like to be judged, humiliated, and dismissed based on assumptions. And I would make them regret every cruel word they'd ever spoken. So I planned, I researched, and I executed the perfect accident. After our fender bender, Christopher insisted on taking me to dinner to make sure I was okay. I protested, playing my role perfectly, but he insisted. We went to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, nothing fancy. I could see he was trying to choose a place that wouldn't make me uncomfortable with my financial situation. "So, Olivia, what do you do?" he asked over pasta. I work at a coffee shop, I lied smoothly. I'm also taking online classes, business management. I want to open my own cafe someday. His eyes lit up. That's ambitious. I admire that. We talked for hours, and here's the thing that surprised me. Christopher was actually nice. When he wasn't surrounded by his family's influence, he was charming, funny, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. For a moment, I almost felt guilty about my plan. Almost. But then he said something that reminded me why I was doing this. You know, Olivia, you're different from the women I usually date. You're real. You care about things that matter. Most women I meet just see dollar signs when they look at me. I smiled sweetly. That must be hard. You have no idea, he sighed. My mother always says I need to be careful, that women will try to trap me for my money. But you didn't even know who I was when we met. Oh, Christopher, if only you knew. 3 months into our relationship, Christopher invited me to dinner at the Vanderbilt estate. I'd been waiting for this moment. I dressed carefully, a simple dress from Target, cheap shoes, and minimal jewelry. I looked exactly like what they expected, a poor girl trying to infiltrate their wealthy world. The Vanderbilt mansion was everything you'd imagine. Massive, opulent, intimidating. A butler answered the door and led me to the dining room where Christopher's family waited. Margaret Vanderbilt sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disgust. Caroline, Christopher's sister, smirked into her wine glass. His father, Richard, simply looked bored. "So," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you're Olivia. Christopher has told us so much about you." "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Vanderbilt," I said, making sure my voice sounded slightly nervous. "Tell me, dear, what is it you do?" "I work at a coffee shop, ma'am. Barista." I watched Margaret's eye twitch. "How quaint. And your family, what do they do?" "My father worked in construction before he passed away. My mother is a teacher." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I see," Margaret said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "And you met Christopher through—" "A car accident, actually," Christopher interjected, reaching for my hand. "Best accident of my life." Caroline snorted in her wine. "How romantic. A car crash. Very Cinderella story." Throughout dinner, they peppered me with questions designed to make me uncomfortable. They talked about their vacation homes, their private jets, their connections to European royalty. They name-dropped restaurants I probably hadn't heard of and designers I wouldn't know. I played my part perfectly. I looked overwhelmed, out of place, intimidated. I used the wrong fork. I didn't know which wine was which. I was exactly what they expected. But inside, I was taking notes. Every condescending comment, every cruel smirk, every dismissive glance. I was building my case. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I overheard Margaret talking to Christopher in the study. "She has to go, Christopher." "Mother, I care about her." "Care?" Margaret's laugh was sharp. "Darling, you can care about a puppy. You don't marry it. This girl is clearly a gold digger. She probably researched you, planned that accident, everything." I almost laughed at the irony. "She's not like that," Christopher defended. "She didn't even know who I was when we met." "They never do, dear. It's part of their act. Listen to me. Have your fun, but when it's time to get serious, you'll marry someone from our world. The Hastings daughter would be perfect, or perhaps the Vanderburg girl." "I'm not having this conversation again." "You will have it, and you will listen. Our family has a reputation to maintain. We don't mix with her type. Your father and I have worked too hard to build this empire to have it tainted by some barista with stars in her eyes." I walked back into the room, pretending I'd heard nothing.
Christopher drove me home that night, apologizing for his family. "They'll come around," he promised. "They just need time to get to know you." I smiled and kissed his cheek. "It's okay. I understand. I'm not exactly what they expected." "That's what I love about you," he said. And despite everything, despite my plan, despite the revenge I was plotting, I felt something twist in my chest because I was starting to fall for him too. Over the next 3 months, the Vanderbilt family made it their mission to break me. Margaret would invite me to lunch at exclusive restaurants and forget to tell me about the dress code, ensuring I'd show up in casual clothes while everyone else wore designer gowns. She'd introduce me to her friends as Christopher's little friend, with emphasis on the word little. Caroline was worse. She'd post photos on social media from family events I wasn't invited to, tagging Christopher with captions like, "Family only, the people who really matter." She'd send me links to articles about gold diggers who target wealthy men with messages like, "Interesting read, thought you might relate, JK." Richard, Christopher's father, simply pretended I didn't exist. When I was in the room, he looked through me like I was invisible. But the worst was the charity gala. Christopher invited me to the annual Vanderbilt Foundation Gala, a black tie event that raised millions for various causes. I was excited until Margaret called the day before. "Olivia, dear, about the gala tomorrow, I've arranged for a stylist to help you. We can't have you showing up in, well, whatever you'd normally wear. The press will be there, and we have an image to maintain." The stylist she sent arrived with a dress that was deliberately unflattering, outdated, and cheap-looking. The shoes didn't fit. The jewelry was costume pieces that looked ridiculous.
"Mrs. Vanderbilt specifically requested this look," the stylist said apologetically. She seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. I wore it anyway. At the gala, I watched Margaret's face light up with malicious satisfaction when she saw me. Christopher looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. I was introduced to their high society friends as Christopher's girlfriend, with such dismissive tones that several people actually laughed. But the final straw came when I overheard Margaret talking to a group of women by the champagne fountain. "That's her," Margaret said, nodding in my direction. "Christopher's little charity project picked her up off the street, practically. She works at Starbucks." "Actually, it's a local coffee shop," I'd wanted to say, but I held my tongue. "How long do you give it?" one woman asked. "Oh, he'll tire of her soon enough. Christopher always does. He likes to play the hero, save the damsel in distress. But when it comes to marriage, he knows where his duty lies." They all laughed, and I felt something inside me snap. Not with anger, with anticipation. Because tomorrow was the day I'd been planning for. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the Vanderbilt family would learn that the woman they'd been mocking, dismissing, and humiliating for months was about to buy their entire company outright. I woke up the next morning with a smile on my face. Today was the day. I'd spent months playing the poor, helpless girl, months enduring the condescension and cruelty, months watching Christopher struggle between his love for me and his loyalty to his family. Today, Olivia Bennett would disappear, and Olivia Bennett, the CEO, would emerge. I dressed carefully, but not in my usual thrift store clothes. Today, I wore a custom Chanel suit worth $15,000. My hair was professionally styled. I wore the diamond earrings I'd bought myself when my company hit its first $1 billion, each earring worth more than Margaret's engagement ring. I looked in the mirror and smiled. Let's do this. The plan was perfect. 6 months ago, I'd learned that Vanderbilt real estate was facing a cash flow problem. They'd made several bad investments and were vulnerable to a takeover. Through a series of shell companies and strategic moves, I'd quietly been buying up their shares. As of this morning, I owned 51% of Vanderbilt real estate. The board meeting was at 10 a.m. Christopher didn't know I'd be there. His family certainly didn't. I arrived at the Vanderbilt building in my own car this time, A limited edition Bugatti worth $3 million. The same security guard who'd looked at me with pity when I visited Christopher in my old Honda now stammered and opened the door with shaking hands. "Good morning, Miss Bennett." I smiled. "Good morning, James." I took the private elevator to the top floor where the boardroom was located. Through the glass walls, I could see Margaret, Richard, and Christopher already seated with the other board members. They were reviewing quarterly reports, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I walked in, and the room fell silent. "Who are you?" Margaret demanded, standing up. "This is a private board meeting. Security." "Mrs. Vanderbilt," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I'm Olivia Bennett. We've met several times, though you might not recognize me in appropriate attire." Recognition dawned on her face, followed by confusion, then anger. "What are you doing here? Christopher, what is the meaning of this?" Christopher looked as confused as his mother. "Olivia? Why are you dressed like that? What's going on?" I took my seat at the head of the table. "I'm here for the board meeting. As of this morning, I own 51% of Vanderbilt real estate, which makes me the majority shareholder, and effectively, your new boss." You could have heard a pin drop. "That's impossible," Richard said, his face turning red. "We would have known." "Would you?" I interrupted, opening my briefcase and distributing documents to each board member. "Over the past 6 months, through various investment firms and holding companies, I've systematically purchased shares from your smaller investors, all completely legal and above board. My lawyers are very thorough." Margaret's face had gone white. You planned this? The accident, the relationship, all of it?" "The accident, yes. The relationship, that was unexpected. But let's not pretend you're victims here, Mrs. Vanderbilt. For months, you've treated me like garbage because you thought I was poor. You've mocked me, humiliated me, and tried to drive me away from your son, all because you judged me based on my bank account." I stood up, walking around the table. "Do you know what's funny? I have more money than your entire family combined. Bennett Technologies, the company I founded when I was 23, is worth $5 billion. I'm one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, but you never bothered to look beyond my cheap clothes and fake job." Christopher stood up, his face a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You lied to me about everything."
"I lied about my job and my wealth," I said, meeting his eyes. "I never lied about my feelings. Everything between us was real, Christopher. At least, it was real for me." "This is insane," Caroline burst out. "You can't just come in here and—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted, "and I have. Now, let's discuss the future of this company. Richard, Margaret, your positions as CEO and COO are terminated, effective immediately. The board will vote on new leadership. I'm nominating myself as CEO." "You can't do this!" Margaret screamed. "We built this company." "And you ran it into the ground with poor decisions and arrogant leadership. I'm saving it. The employees will keep their jobs. The company will thrive. But the Vanderbilt family's reign of cruelty and elitism ends today." I looked at each board member. "All in favor?" One by one, they raised their hands. They'd seen the numbers. They knew I was their best chance at survival. "Motion passes," I said. "This meeting is adjourned." The media went crazy. "Billionaire heiress goes undercover to expose elitist family," read one headline. "Gold digger? More like gold mine," read another. The story went viral. People loved it. The idea of a rich family getting their comeuppance from someone they underestimated was pure gold for the news cycle. I gave one interview to a major business publication where I explained my reasoning. "I did this to prove a point," I said. "We live in a society that judges people based on their wealth and appearance. The Vanderbilt family treated me horribly because they thought I was poor. They assumed I was a gold digger because I didn't fit their image of who deserved their son's attention. But the truth is, character has nothing to do with bank accounts. Kindness isn't determined by your address, and love shouldn't be conditional on your financial statement. The interviewer asked, "Do you regret deceiving Christopher?" I paused. Yes and no. I regret hurting him. He was caught in the middle of something that wasn't really about him, but I don't regret exposing his family's true nature. Sometimes people need a mirror held up to their behavior before they can see how ugly it is. 3 weeks after the takeover, Christopher showed up at my penthouse apartment, the one I actually owned in the most expensive building in Manhattan. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About my family, about you, about the way I was raised. And I was right about all of it. I watched my family treat you horribly, and I told myself it would get better. I made excuses for them. I chose my comfort over your dignity." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "But here's what I can't figure out. Was any of it real? Did you ever actually care about me, or was I just part of your revenge plan?" I considered lying. It would be easier, but I'd done enough lying. "I fell in love with you," I admitted. "I didn't plan to, I didn't want to, but the man you were when we were alone together, away from your family's influence, that man was kind and genuine and everything I didn't expect. So yes, Christopher, it was real. At least for me." "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Because I needed to see if you would stand up for me. I needed to know if you had the strength to go against your family when it mattered. And Christopher, you didn't. You watched them humiliate me at that gala. You heard your mother call me a gold digger. You knew they were trying to break us up, and you chose to hope they'd come around instead of standing up for what was right." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "You're right. I was a coward. I let them treat you that way because it was easier than confronting them." "So where does that leave us?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I love you. I'm pretty sure I've loved you since our third date when you laughed so hard at my stupid joke that you snorted coffee out of your nose. But I don't know if you can forgive me for not protecting you when you needed it." I looked at this man I'd planned to use for revenge and ended up loving despite myself. "I can't give you an answer right now. You hurt me, Christopher, not with your money or your family name, but with your silence when I needed your voice. That's not something that heals overnight." "Yes, I understand. But Olivia, I want you to know something. I quit." "Quit what?" "The family business. All of it. I'm done living in their shadow, following their rules, being who they want me to be. I'm starting my own company. Something ethical, something good. Something that would make you proud." "You don't have to do that for me." "I'm not," he said, standing up. "I'm doing it for me. You held up a mirror, Olivia, and I didn't like what I saw. So I'm changing. No guarantees it'll be enough, no promises that you'll take me back, but I'm doing it anyway, because it's the right thing to do." He walked to the door, then turned back. And for what it's worth, my family learned their lesson too. My mother resigned from every charity board she was on after the backlash. Caroline deleted all her social media. My father actually apologized. I didn't think he knew how. They're not suddenly good people, but they're humbled. After he left, I sat in my apartment and cried, not because I was sad, but because I realized something important. Revenge had been satisfying. Watching the Vanderbilts fall had been gratifying, but it hadn't healed the part of me that was genuinely hurt by their cruelty. It hadn't fixed the trust that was broken. Real healing would take time, work, and forgiveness, the hardest thing of all.
6 months later, I rebuilt Vanderbilt real estate from the ground up. I changed the company culture, implemented ethical practices, and made it a place where people were valued for their work, not their last names. The company thrived, stock prices soared, and the Vanderbilt family watched from the sidelines as I turned their legacy into something better. Margaret and I had one conversation, 6 months after the takeover. She showed up at my office unannounced. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. It was clear the words didn't come easily. "I judged you unfairly, I treated you cruelly, and I was wrong." "Yes, you were," I said simply. My husband and I were raised in a world where class and breeding mattered above all else. We thought we were protecting Christopher by keeping him in that world, but we were really just perpetuating the same elitist nonsense our parents taught us. "So what changed your mind?" I asked. "Do you know how many articles were written about us?" Margaret said, her voice bitter. "How many people called us out for our behavior? We became the villains in a story that went viral worldwide. Our friends stopped calling, our invitations dried up, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be judged and found wanting." She looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You taught us a lesson we desperately needed to learn. I just wish it hadn't been so public." "Would you have learned it any other way?" I asked. She paused. "Probably not." As for Christopher, he kept his word. He started a nonprofit organization that helped underprivileged entrepreneurs start their own businesses. He worked 16-hour days, lived in a modest apartment, and proved that he was more than just his family name. We had coffee sometimes, slowly rebuilt what we'd lost. I wasn't ready to trust him completely, and maybe I never would be. But I could see he was trying, and that counted for something. 1 year later, I was in my office when my assistant buzzed. "Miss Bennett, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" "He says it's personal." Christopher walked in, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest that I'd never quite gotten rid of. "Hi," he said. "Hi." "I know I said I'd give you space, and I have, but it's been a year, and I needed to tell you something." I gestured for him to continue. "I'm not the same person I was. I've spent this year learning to stand on my own, to make decisions based on what's right instead of what's comfortable. I've learned that privilege comes with responsibility, not superiority. And I've learned that love means standing up for someone, even when, especially when, it's hard." "Christopher." "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But I also know that what we had was real and rare and worth fighting for. So I'm here, not to ask for forgiveness, but to ask if you'd be willing to start over. Not as the woman pretending to be poor and the man too weak to defend her, but as two people who know each other's flaws and choose to try anyway." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was different. Harder in some ways, softer in others, more real. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm scared of trusting you again and getting hurt." "I'm scared too, but I think you're worth the risk. We're worth the risk." I thought about the journey that brought us here, the revenge plot that turned into something more, the lessons learned on both sides, the growth, the pain, the change. "Okay," I said finally. "But we start slow. Coffee dates. Real conversations. And Christopher, if I ever feel like you're choosing your comfort over my respect again—" "You won't," he promised. "I learned that lesson. The hard way, but I learned it." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. "Besides," he said with a slight smile, "I can't afford to mess this up. You literally own everything." I laughed, and it felt good. Real. Like,
maybe, just maybe, we could build something genuine from the ruins of my revenge plot. Don't you forget it. And as we sat there, talking about starting over, I realized something important. Revenge had given me satisfaction, but forgiveness, real forgiveness, was giving me something much more valuable. It was giving me a future.